Imagine a nation's supreme leader is suddenly killed, like just completely gone overnight.
Oh, wow.
Right. And the heir apparent, the person the entire apparatus expects to step up and take control, is severely injured and incapacitated.
So just a total leadership void.
Exactly. The government is paralyzed, completely frozen in a state of sheer panic. And then the military steps in, locks down the entire government, and assumes absolute control.
Just a hard takeover.
Yeah, simply because, quite frankly, they have the guns. It's a sudden, terrifying, and complete restructuring of power happening in real time.
I mean, that scenario is basically the ultimate worst case for geopolitical stability.
Yeah.
It completely bypasses any slow, deliberate transition of power or, constitutional protocol. What you get instead is an immediate forced consolidation of control under the direct threat of violence.
And we are breaking down exactly that scenario today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our source material for this is a really fascinating transcript from a Fox News broadcast featuring retired General Jack Keane.
It's an incredibly dense piece of analysis.
It really is. And our mission today is to unpack General Keane's analysis of the rapidly shifting, highly volatile power dynamics that are currently unfolding inside Iran.
Right, because General Keane is providing a very specific military and strategic lens on a conflict that carries massive global implications.
Absolutely.
He focuses heavily on the absolute stall in international negotiations and the very real looming threat of major military escalation.
Now, before we jump in, we need to be crystal clear up front here. The source material we're examining, it contains politically charged geopolitical analysis.
Yes, it definitely does.
So our goal in this deep dive is completely impartial. We are not taking sides, nor are we endorsing the specific viewpoints, policies, or military strategies presented in the original broadcast.
Right, our only job today is to break down the facts.
Exactly. To break down the facts and the strategic architecture of the arguments exactly as they were presented, so you, listening at home, can understand the calculations being made by top-level military analysts.
And, the architecture of this conflict operates like a massive, inevitable chain reaction.
How so?
Well, a sudden leadership vacuum logically necessitates a military power grab.
Right.
That internal shift inherently destroys any diplomatic credibility abroad, which in turn forces a direct collision with severe economic blockades and ultimately a high-stakes military standoff.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a lot. Let's start at the very beginning of that chain reaction, the leadership vacuum.
Yeah, the catalyst for all of this.
Because to understand the global standoff, we first have to look inside Iran's borders at this sudden chaotic void. According to the source, the supreme leader has been killed.
Which is huge.
Massive. It removes the entire ideological and political anchor of the state.
And removing that anchor in an authoritarian regime creates an instant existential crisis.
I can imagine.
I mean, the entire state apparatus relies on a singular, unquestioned authority at the top to mediate disputes and direct policy.
Right.
When that authority vanishes overnight, the institutional framework just fractures.
And making matters vastly more complicated, his son, who has technically taken over, has sustained serious injuries.
Right, the heir apparent.
Yeah, and General Keane points out that this heir is not actually driving the ship. He's relegated to what Keane calls message trafficking.
Message trafficking.
Yeah, he is essentially just pushing communications out, acting as a nominal figurehead, while lacking the physical capacity or the political leverage to actually rule.
Well, nature abhors a vacuum.
Sure does.
Especially a power vacuum in a state built on hard power. When the institutional lines of succession fail or weaken, the faction that owns the force mechanism inevitably takes control.
And in this situation, that's the military.
Exactly. That is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are actively stepping into this void, aggressively filling the power vacuum, and forcing the political hardliners to conform entirely to their will.
And they aren't executing this takeover in total isolation either.
Yeah, they have backing.
Right. The source notes the IRGC is heavily supported by the head of the National Security Council and the Speaker of the Parliament.
Which, provides a thin veneer of institutional legitimacy.
Yeah, to what is fundamentally a military consolidation.
Yeah.
But what really stands out to me is how the foreign minister has been entirely sidelined.
Oh, completely.
He's apparently only useful now because he has existing relationships with the U.S. negotiating team.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine you work for a massive multinational corporation. The CEO dies under tragic circumstances, and the heir groomed for the job is in the ICU on life support.
Total panic.
Total panic in the C-suite.
Yeah.
And instead of the board of directors stepping up, the head of corporate security walks in, locks the boardroom doors from the inside, and announces he's in charge.
Wow.
Not because he knows the business, but simply because he physically holds the keys to the building and controls the security feeds.
You know, that corporate security analogy captures the ruthless pragmatism of the situation perfectly.
Right.
Because the IRGC has the guns. When a regime faces a sudden internal crisis, political titles like foreign ministers lose all their weight.
They just don't matter anymore.
Exactly. The only currency that matters is the ability to project force and ensure the immediate survival of the regime itself.
So the politicians are just stuck.
Yeah, the political officials, even those considered extreme hardliners, have no choice but to bend to the military apparatus. Right now, the IRGC's primary directive is keeping the structure intact at all costs.
Which renders the foreign minister essentially just an email client.
That's a good way to put it.
He's just a contact list for the U.S. negotiators, A face for diplomacy, while the IRGC calls the actual shots from behind closed doors.
And that internal military takeover completely derails the mechanics of international diplomacy.
Because the guys at the table have no power.
Exactly. Because the IRGC is consolidating control at home, the Iranian political officials currently sitting at the negotiation table with the U.S. have zero independent authority to determine Iran's stance.
So they're physically present at the table, but they aren't authorized to actually play the game.
Their controllers back in Tehran are dictating every single move, which transforms the entire diplomatic process.
It's not even a negotiation anymore.
No, it is no longer a negotiation aimed at finding a geopolitical compromise. It has devolved into what General Keane frames as a fundamental test of will.
A test of will. Okay, so what does this all mean?
Right.
Like, is Iran's strategy at the negotiation table essentially just a waiting game to see if the American public gets tired first?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, warfare isn't just about bullets and bombs. It is profoundly psychological.
Right.
And asymmetrical warfare relies heavily on exploiting the opponent's political structure. General Keane's analysis highlights that Iran knows exactly how much physical damage they have sustained.
They're very aware.
Very aware. They have assessed their ruined infrastructure, their casualties, and their military depletion. They are acutely aware that they cannot survive, let alone win, a head-to-head conventional military conflict.
So they can't fight a traditional war.
Exactly. Therefore, their only viable strategic imperative is to leverage the U.S. domestic political climate.
Because democracies have specific vulnerabilities that autocracies just do not have.
Absolutely.
In a democracy, public opinion actually dictates long-term policy. Economic realities, inflation, the financial and emotional cost of a sustained military presence overseas, those things put immense tangible pressure on elected officials.
They really do.
So the IRGC's calculation seems to be that if they can just hold out and endure the pain long enough, the American electorate will simply lose patience, get tired of the news cycle, and demand an end to it.
Yeah, the test of will is strictly a test of endurance.
Right.
The Iranian strategy asks a single question: can a fractured, heavily damaged authoritarian regime endure more physical and economic pain than the American public can endure political fatigue or inconvenience?
That is wild.
They are banking on the idea that the U.S. will blink first because of our election cycles and our sensitivity to public pressure.
So they're weaponizing our own system against us. But that strategy of waiting it out slams headfirst into a massive ticking clock.
A huge ticking clock.
Because while Iran is trying to outlast the U.S. political cycle, they are simultaneously facing total economic collapse.
Yeah, the endurance game only works if you have the resources to survive the wait.
Right. And according to the source, they definitively do not.
Uh-huh.
General Keane highlights that President Trump established a severe blockade that serves as a seminal event since the last negotiations.
And we need to be clear here, this is not a standard package of diplomatic sanction.
No, this is way bigger.
Much bigger. A blockade of this magnitude fundamentally alters the geopolitical calculus.
Yeah.
We are talking about a deliberate, systematic severing of the economic arteries that keep the Iranian state alive.
The numbers in the report are absolutely staggering. This blockade has cut off 80% of Iran's revenue sources.
80%.
80%. That includes choking off major oil exports and actively seizing cargo ships. Keane specifically notes a recently sequestered cargo ship as a prime example of this enforcement in action.
The impact is just profound.
Yeah, Keane asserts that if this continues for just weeks or months, the regime will collapse economically.
It can completely fold.
Exactly. Consequently, Iran is refusing to negotiate anything until that blockade is lifted.
Well, the mechanics of losing 80% of national revenue are devastating.
I mean, I can't even fathom.
Right, think about it. A regime built on force relies entirely on its ability to pay the enforcers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If the IRGC cannot pay its soldiers, if it cannot fund its internal security apparatus or its proxy networks, it cannot maintain control over a deeply frustrated populace.
So the blockade isn't just an economic penalty.
Not at all. It is a direct existential threat to the personal survival of the regime's leaders.
Think about what an 80% loss means, practically. I want you listening to imagine waking up tomorrow and 80% of your household income is just gone.
Oof. Vanished.
Gone. You still have your mortgage, you still have to buy groceries, you still have to pay for your car,
Right.
but you only have 20 cents on the dollar to do it.
You would be in absolute catastrophic crisis within a matter of days.
Days.
Yeah.
Now scale that up to an entire nation state. A state that is actively trying to fund a massive military apparatus, suppress internal dissent, and maintain critical infrastructure.
It's an impossible situation.
It's no wonder they are refusing to proceed with talks. They cannot negotiate on nuclear programs or regional proxies when the regime is bankrupting itself and risks falling to an internal revolution.
And that's exactly it. The ultimate goal of the Iranian regime right now is not grand regional ambition.
Right.
It is simply staying in power. The blockade strips away their ability to ensure that survival.
Which explains the absolute deadlock at the negotiation table.
Exactly. They are sitting there to buy time, but the blockade ensures they have absolutely no time left to buy.
That economic desperation is exactly why the military calculus has changed overnight. If Iran refuses to negotiate while the blockade is active, and the U.S. refuses to lift the blockade because it is their absolute best piece of leverage,
Right, it's a total stalemate.
diplomacy hits a brick wall. If Iran can't afford to wait, the U.S. and its allies are positioning themselves to ensure Iran can't afford to fight either.
Because when diplomatic channels stall out and economic pressure reaches a critical mass, the military options are pulled off the shelf and put directly on the table.
And the options currently on the table are overwhelming. According to the broadcast, the U.S. president is actively threatening a return to combat operations.
And they have the assets in place.
Yeah, General Keane states that the U.S. capacity to conduct strikes in the region has doubled since the start of the war. Doubled.
That is a massive buildup.
On top of that, Israel has entirely replenished all its magazine shortages. Their weapons, interceptors, and ammunition are fully restocked. The coalition is described as full-throttled ready to take down Iran's remaining offensive weapons, ballistic missiles, and launchers.
Even with the acknowledgement from the source that some of these Iranian assets are deeply buried in underground bunkers.
Why, just fortified bunkers?
Yeah, even with that, the sheer concentration of kinetic power currently idling on the runway is staggering.
It really is.
It is a fully prepared, overwhelming force waiting for a green light to dismantle the infrastructure that contributes to the war effort.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
General Keane explicitly names the infrastructure targets the president has threatened to hit. Bridges and energy infrastructure, specifically power plants.
Right.
Now, my initial reaction was, wait, bombing bridges and power grids crosses a line. Isn't that civilian infrastructure?
That is the common pushback.
Right. Like, does completely blacking out civilian infrastructure risk galvanizing the Iranian public behind the IRGC? Doesn't dropping bridges and shutting off power essentially give an unpopular regime the exact domestic unity and anti-American sentiment they are currently lacking?
That is the core strategic tension in modern warfare, for sure.
Yeah.
But General Keane addresses this pushback directly from a strict military doctrine perspective.
What does he say?
He firmly asserts that anyone who thinks bridges and energy infrastructure are not legitimate targets fundamentally misunderstands history and the rules of the law of war.
Wow. Really?
Yes. From his analytical lens, the risk of galvanizing the public is secondary to the immediate mechanical necessity of paralyzing the enemy's ability to wage war.
Because a bridge carries civilian commuters, but it also carries military convoys, supply lines, and mobile missile launchers.
Exactly. That dual-use reality is exactly what Keane points to.
Yep.
A power plant keeps the lights on in a hospital, but it also powers the command and control centers, the radar arrays, and the ventilation systems for those deeply buried underground bunkers where the IRGC is hiding their ballistic missiles.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about the ventilation systems for the bunkers.
Right. Keane's argument is that these targets directly and materially contribute to the war effort. By severing the transportation arteries and destroying the energy grid, you physically dismantle the regime's operational capacity.
It is an application of total war logic designed to exert maximum psychological pressure.
Absolutely.
By publicly putting these very specific targets on the table, the U.S. is sending a clear message to the IRGC. They are saying, we know you are hiding underground. We won't just bomb the bunkers, we will destroy the power grid that keeps your air filtration systems running.
We will drop the bridges you need to move your weapons.
Exactly. It's a highly credible military threat meant to force Iran to realize that the catastrophic pain of the economic blockade is nothing compared to the absolute devastation of a renewed, doubled capacity bombing campaign.
Because every move in this scenario is designed to constrain the opponent's choices.
Right.
The military threat is the anvil, and the economic blockade is the hammer.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
The IRGC is trapped between the two, with their internal power consolidation offering no real solution to either problem.
So let's take a step back and look at the entire board, because the domino effect here is incredibly volatile.
It really is.
We started with a chaotic leadership void, a dead supreme leader, and an incapacitated heir. That void immediately triggers a power grab by the IRGC, the faction that controls the physical mechanisms of force.
Right.
Because the military is now fully in charge, international negotiations stall out. The diplomats at the table have no real authority and are just trying to run down the clock.
Just waiting out the U.S. public.
But the IRGC cannot just wait out the U.S. political cycle, because they are slamming headfirst into a brutal 80% economic blockade that is starving the regime of its basic viability.
They're out of time and out of money.
Exactly. And all of this culminates with a massive replenished stockpile of U.S. and Israeli weapons, essentially sitting on standby, ready to completely dismantle Iran's energy and transportation infrastructure.
It is a remarkably fragile geopolitical moment.
Truly.
The margin for error is essentially zero, and every single action by any party involved forces an immediate high-stakes reaction.
It leaves you with something profound to mull over, honestly. We've spent a lot of time today talking about physical destruction missiles, deeply buried launchers, the potential of blowing up bridges and power plants.
Right.
But look at what is actually bringing this regime to the brink of collapse. I want to leave you with a final thought to explore on your own.
Okay.
In modern conflicts, which is actually the more devastating weapon, is it a double capacity for military airstrikes, primed to wipe out physical infrastructure? Or is it an invisible economic blockade that quietly starves a regime of 80% of its viability, rotting the system from the inside out without firing a single shot?
You know, the shifting nature of modern warfare makes that a deeply complicated question.
It really does.
It highlights how financial mechanisms have become just as lethal, if not more so, than kinetic strikes.
So, what stands out to you about this incredibly tense situation? Do you think economic pressure or military might is the ultimate deciding factor in a standoff like this?
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, drop down into the comments and let us know your perspective.
Yeah.
If you found this breakdown insightful and want to keep exploring the hidden mechanics of global events, hit that like button, share this deep dive with a friend who loves geopolitical analysis, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss out.
Definitely.
Remember, sometimes the most dangerous part of a crisis isn't the explosion, it's what happens right after the head of security locks the boardroom doors. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.